Once upon a time, Texas had a serious Comanche problem, right? This is before Texas was in the hands of the Anglo, and Texas was a part of Mexico. So the Mexican authorities got really, really tired of Comanche raids into northern Mexico and Comanche, laying waste to their towns, taking their children as hostages or captives or sometimes foot slaves. And so they decided to make a gamble, right? They invited a bunch of dirty white boys into Texas to settle Texas in colonies, right? So that there would be a meat barrier between themselves and the raiding Comanches, right? So an enterprising dude named Moses Austin and his son Stephen went to the authorities in the town of what is now San Antonio and got a grant to allow, to bring in 100 families from, quote, the old states, right? So the Mexican authorities sort of precondition to this prerequisite is that all the new immigrants to Tejas convert to Catholicism, and they not bring enslaved people with them. And guess what the Texans did? They did none of they did absolutely none of that whatsoever, right? So that's 1825, and the colonies start to grow. There are the original families, and then more families are allowed to come in. The Anglo population of Texas begins to grow, and then by 1830, Mexico says, okay, no more dirty white boys up in Texas. It's going to flip the culture. It's going to turn it into an Anglo state, right? Guess what the dirty white boys did when they heard that? They flooded in, right? So now Anglo-Americans from the old states happen to be the first illegal immigrants into Texas, which is an interesting thing to consider. Now, why were the Comanche so feared? They were a smaller people than the Lakota, than some of the different tribes that you've probably heard of, than the Cherokee, a smaller people. And they were bullied by other tribes. They were bullied by the Lakota. They were bullied by various peoples that we refer to as the horse tribes, right? So the horse is not native to North America. The horse was brought over by the Spanish in the 1600s and the 1700s, and probably there are horses in the states earlier than that, right? Or in the territories earlier than that. The Spanish bring over horses. Horses eventually escape and get free, reproduce in the wild, and then you have these massive herds of wild Mustangs roaming around America, right? So the Comanche at some point in the 1700s ran into the horse and discovered them. And no one who has ever existed on the planet has ever ridden better than the Comanche. It's like old friends. They found one another, and this allowed the Comanche to be highly mobile. It allowed them to follow the bison, right? So their entire culture was following the buffalo, hunting, and then when they wanted to, raiding, which means you go where the people are and you take their stuff. And then the doctrine is well documented, the Comanche: torture and kill the men, rape and kill the women, take the children for slaves or adoption, right? There was no other way for the Comanche. That's what they did. That's why they were so feared. And they begin to roll up other warriors and other tribes and engagements, drift south to Texas following the buffalo, and they established their ancestral lands. They were fearsome to outsiders, right? They're protecting their hunting grounds. They're protecting their way of life. Initially, their interactions with Anglo-Texans were fairly peaceful. And early on, some of the wiser Anglos, like Noah Smithwick, said, hey, we can carry on trade with these folks. We ought not make enemies of them. Right? These people are good to trade with. They have an understanding of the territory, et cetera, et cetera. In 1835, the Anglos were getting riled up. And you know how white people are. You know how when they all get together and they just start getting riled up, they get fired up, right? And someone goes, woo, right? And then it just all goes off. So the Mexican authorities were a little nervous about the dirty white boys on their northern border. And we're like, we put these people up there to protect, like kind of buffer us against the Comanches? So they had loaned the Texans of Gonzales a cannon, just loaned it to them. So they politely sent a delegation to the Anglos at Gonzales and said, could you return the cannon we gave you? And guess what the Texans did? Come and take it. And this launched the Texas Revolution, which goes from like 1835 to 1836 and ends with Texans under the command of Sam Houston establishing their own independent republic. All right, that's 1836 in March of that year. And that independent republic lasts from 1836 to January 1st of 1846, right, when Texas is annexed by the U.S. and becomes a state. Okay. So all Sam Houston wanted, the reason he was the first president of the Republic of Texas and all that kind of stuff, he just wanted to get Texas annexed as a state so he could have the protection of the United States Army, so there could be infrastructure and road, all the kind of stuff that comes with being a member of the states. During those republic years, which everyone now is nostalgic about, and Texas was a republic, everyone starved. There was no money, people really lost it. The Republic of Texas had no funds with which to pay people. So they paid employees and anyone else that they had debts to, they paid them in land. They gave them parcels of land, which I don't know if you know this or not. You cannot eat land. Now you can grow stuff on it, but it takes a minute, all right? So Mexico is growing increasingly nervous now about having the United States right on its northern border. They dispute whether the boundary line is it. Is it the Nueces, which is farther north, or is it the Rio Grande, which is the current border, right? Can't quite figure this out. And so James K. Polk from North Carolina, all right, he sends Zachary Taylor's army to kind of ride back and forth up and down the Rio Grande because he knows if he do that enough, eventually the Mexicans will attack because it's like literal maneuvers on their northern border. They attack, and then we get all indignant, like, Mexicans have declared war on, oh my gosh, all we were doing was riding around with the northern border. All right, and so we invade Mexico, and the Mexicans are defeated in every single battle, and then we force them in the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, right, to fork over not only officially now Texas, with its border being the Rio Grande, but parts of Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, Nevada, and all of California. So with that treaty, the landmass of the United States expands by about a third, right? So it's an enormous territorial acquisition. Now, this introduces all kinds of issues. One of the issues is this. I know this is history. We're going to get to the blood in a second. Americans had been very nervous, white Americans, I should say, had been very nervous about the issue of slavery. And you see this as early as the American Revolution. 1775, there's when Thomas Jefferson writes the Declaration of Independence, we're all equal, all men are created equal. There's talk, and even among Jefferson, Like, does this mean black people? And various founding fathers, like, why shouldn't it mean black people, right? And in the initial draft of the Declaration, if you read the Declaration, there's the we hold these truths to be self-evident, and then there's like in parentheses, suckers, and then there's, I'm kidding, and then there are all these like grievances against Great Britain, right? And it's written directly to the king. You have done this to us, you have done that to us, and one of the grievances in the first draft is you have introduced the crime of human slavery to the colonies before it could like defend itself from this great evil. And Benjamin Franklin, who was on that committee, said, what are you doing? Do you want 13 colonies together, or do you want like 5 or 6 colonies? Do you think South Carolina is going to join with this? So Thomas Jefferson took it out, and this is an original sin of the founding fathers. They allowed the war crime, and I believe straight up sin of human slavery to exist in the United States. So then there was this balancing act, right? So as the United States began to add states, people in the North more and more became more anti-slavery and were concerned that as new states were admitted, are they going to be admitted to the Union with slavery or without slavery? So a compromise was struck in 1820. It's called the Missouri Compromise, right? Every new state that is admitted to the Union, a quote, slave state, has to be balanced by the admission of a free state, right? And so this was they're kicking the can down the road while millions of people are suffering in bondage, right? But open war hadn't broken out between the states. With the acquisition of all this new territory in 1848, Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, there's this huge conversation about what happens to slavery. The Missouri Compromise says you can't push it west of the Mississippi, except for Missouri, that's the compromise. You can't push it west of the Mississippi, of course there's Texas, and north of that boundary marker, right? So Southerners very much wanted slavery in California. Northerners very much didn't want that to happen, right? And so by 1848, 1850, the powder keg that would ignite into civil war, the fuse was already lit. It wouldn't blow up till 1861, but 13 years before, it's already burning. Now, this is the context into which we like step with Blood Meridian in those opening pages. Right? This is the historical context. It's all about this new territory that is wild and is appealing to the American imagination because it's, quote, lawless and wild and dangerous, but also free land, right? There was the sense in the eastern states that everything had been ordered by lawyers, everything was locked down, and only wealthy people could make it in America. It's quite interesting to hear talk today. I think, who was it? You were, Zach, you were talking about like the union activity, writer's strike, and now there's United Auto Workers strike, right? And, a concern about like, you've got like a few people with all the money, and then most of us we don't have all the money, right? You see very similar concerns in this time period. Like, how do poor folks get along? How do you make it in America, right? And so one thing that becomes popular as well, this new land has not, quote, been settled, right? This is all politically very contentious, right? This new land hasn't been settled, so we can go and take it. Now, what's the problem with that view? There are already a bunch of people who have been living there for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, right? Different Native American tribes. So it's, by saying the land is unsettled means, well, there's not a Walmart and a Buc-ee's and a Trader Joe's, right? It's like you have beautiful, pristine land that can support native populations very, very easily. That's, rich with natural resources, and the Comanche were perfectly fine. Comanche, many other tribes are perfectly fine before dirty white boys came traipsing along. So They certainly didn't go hungry, and they had a rich culture. Though, interestingly, right, a tribe like the Comanche, who were completely nomadic and migratory, right? They followed the bison. They didn't write. They had a complex language, complex narrative tradition, but they didn't write anything down. They didn't build permanent structures, and by that I mean structures in stone. They didn't make pottery. I mean, it's ridiculous to be a migratory people and make things that are easily breakable, right? So their material culture was rich and interesting. They were highly, highly skilled craftsmen and bowyers and storytellers and all this different stuff, right? Hunters, warriors. But the Anglo mind, especially at this period, is very much about the written word, right? The written word is the Bible. The written word is unassailable, right? The Anglo belief was that God has spoken to us, and he's spoken to us in the form of this book, right? Bible literally means book, right? Bible, bibliography, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that is the historical context for the bloodshed we're about to see. Now, page 3. See the child. He is pale and thin. He wears a thin and ragged linen shirt. He stokes the scullery fire. Outside lie dark-turned fields with rags of snow and darker woods beyond that harbor yet a few last wolves. His folk are known for hewers of wood and drawers of water, but in truth his father has been a schoolmaster. He lies and drink. He quotes from poets whose names are now lost. The boy crouches by the fire and watches him. Night of your birth, 33. The Leonids they were called. God, how the stars did fall. I look for blackness, holes in the heavens, the dipper stove. The mother dead these 14 years did incubate in her own bosom the creature who would carry her off. The father never speaks her name. The child does not know it. He has a sister in this world that he will not see again. He watches, pale and unwashed. He can neither read nor write, and in him broods already a taste for mindless violence. All history present in that visage. The child, the father of the man. At 14, he runs away. He will not see again the freezing kitchen house in the pre-dawn dark, the firewood, the washpots. He wanders west as far as Memphis, a solitary migrant upon that flat and pastoral landscape. Blacks in the fields, lank and stooped, their fingers spider-like among the bowls of cotton. A shadowed agony in the garden. Against the sun's declining, figures move in the slower dusk across a paper skyline. A lone dark husbandman pursuing mule and harrow down the rain-blown bottomland toward night. A year later, he's in St. Louis. He is taken on for New Orleans aboard a flatboat, 42 days on the river. At night, the steamboats hoot and trudge past through the black waters, all alight like cities adrift. They break up the float and sell the lumber, and he walks in the streets and hears tongues he has not heard before. He lives in a room above a courtyard behind a tavern, and he comes down at night like some fairy book beast to fight with the sailors. He is not big, but he has big wrists, big hands. His shoulders are set close. The child's face is curiously untouched behind the scars, the eyes oddly innocent. They fight with fists, with feet, with bottles or knives, all races, all breeds. Men whose speech sounds like the grunting of apes. Men from lands so far and queer that standing over them where they lie bleeding in the mud, he feels mankind itself vindicated. On a certain night, a Maltese boatswain shoots him in the back with a small pistol, swinging to deal with the man he has shot again just below the heart. The man flees and leans against the bar with blood running out of his shirt. The others look away. After a while, he sits on the floor. He lies in a cot in the room upstairs for 2 weeks while the tavern keeper's wife attends him. She brings his meals. She carries out his slops. A hard-looking woman with a wiry body like a man's. By the time he is mended, he has no money to pay her, and he leaves in the night and sleeps on the riverbank until he can find a boat that will take him on. The boat is going to Texas. Only now is the child finally divested of all he has been. His origins are become remote, as is his destiny, and not again in all the world's turning will there be terrain so wild and barbarous to try whether the stuff of creation may be shaped a man's will, or whether his own heart is not another kind of clay. The passengers are a diffident lot. They cage their eyes, and no man asks another what it is that brings him here. He sleeps on the deck, a pilgrim among others. He watches the dim shore rise and fall, gray seabirds gawking, flights of pelicans coastwise above the gray swells. They disembark aboard a lighter, settlers with their chattels, all studying the low coastline, the thin bite of sand and scrub pine swimming in the haze. He walks through the narrow streets of the port. The air smells of salt and new-sawn lumber. At night, whores call to him from the dark like souls in want. A week and he is on the move again, a few dollars in his purse that he's earned, walking the sand roads of the southern night alone, his hands balled in the cotton pockets of his cheap coat. Earthen causeways across the marshland, egrets in their rookeries white as candles among the moss. The wind has a raw edge to it and leaves a lope by the roadside and skelter on in the night fields. He moves north through small settlements and farms working for day wages and found. He sees a parricide hanged in a crossroads hamlet, and the man's friends run forward and pull his legs, and he hangs dead from his rope while urine darkens his trousers. He works in a sawmill. He works in a diphtheria pest house. He takes as pay from a farmer an aged mule, and to back this animal in the year 1849, he rides up through the latter-day Republic of Fredonia into the town of Nacogdoches. What is the tone that Cormac establishes with this biblical, almost neo-biblical voice that the narrator speaks in? What is that? What is the atmosphere he creates? You guys know vibes? You're always talking about this is a vibe and that is a vibe. What's the vibe here?
Good.
It's not good. The vibe ain't good.
Does it say eerie a little bit?
There's a sense of there is an eerie vibe. What else about? All right? It feels like this narrator speaks to us out of this time. All right? The narrator is not a narrator of 1985 when the book is published. The narrator is a narrator of 1849 and of this place and period. What else about the atmosphere that Cormac creates here, the vibe? A world where your friends run forward and pull on your legs so you hang quicker until urine darkens your trousers and you hang by your neck until you're dead. Yeah.
It kind of feels like an inevitable plotting towards death. Like it's just like the pace is constantly moving forward regardless of what happens. And that's like kind of scary when what is happening is a lot of death and violence.
Right. In most novels, most stories that depict this level of violence and this level of whatever you want to call it, bloodshed, catastrophe, the narrator pauses and talks and makes judgments. This is a very sad thing that happened. Or you get a chance to stop and There's a sense of elegy or eulogy or some sort of nod toward that. Not here at all. These are the things that happen. They're violent things. They're horrific things. They are how things are. And they wrote on. They wrote on. They wrote on. What else about the atmosphere that Cormac has created, the vibe that he's created? Elizabeth?
It was very smothering.
Yeah, there's a dark that is oppressive. A weird thing will happen to you as you read this. The dark will become more and more and more oppressive, and then there'll just be a shift for you where it becomes the surface. That's what you expect. And there begins to be a very odd energy, right, as we confront the evil that is Judge Holden. How would you describe the kid? The kid is, we're watching him, right? We don't enter into his mind. We don't know what the kid thinks. We don't know what the kid feels. But how is the kid depicted in these opening pages?
I feel like he's really matured at such a young age. Like I think if the narrator never said the kid, I think he's pretty much like an adult. I mean, he tussles with Toadvine as if like they are like mano y mano, and like, you know, and like we don't really see how he processes it. You don't know what he's thinking, how he feels, if he's scared, if he's like worried, he just does it.
He's a 14-year-old UFC fighter in New Orleans.
Right, and I think, yeah, and I think that like tells us like how in those times it's like you have to be an adult, otherwise like there's no room for childhood, there's no room for like play.
Well, yeah, and he runs, I mean, one of the first head notes, runs away from childhood in Tennessee, runs away. Like he runs away from his childhood. He runs away his first act in the world is to kill the woman who brought him into the world. It wasn't intentional, but that's what happens in this particular birth, right? His experience is he's born a killer. And then he enters this world of violence. And it is striking because I think at some level, you kind of forget, we're talking about a 14-year-old. I can't remember what I was like at 14, but I wasn't like this. I wasn't like this. I know that time period in my life, I'm still very much a child, right? And Cormac doesn't deny that, right? The first sentence is a command. Not like, the kid had blonde hair and the kid, no. See the child. It's an imperative. It's an order on the part of the narrator. And the entirety of the book, and this is something very important about what Cormac is up to here, Cormac is forcing us to look at things we'd rather not look at. He's forcing American readers to look at things that we don't want to think about being part of our history. We'd rather not know. We'd rather not see it. We want to think of ourselves in a different way. And Cormac is saying, look at this. See this. Right? Which is also the technique of horror films, taking you down that hallway toward the monster, right? And when you're watching a horror film, and it's like a good one, like it's really got you, and you're going down that, generally, the trope is who is walking down that hall? What kind of character is going down that hallway in a horror film? Stupid, but what else about the character?
Young, naive.
She's young, naive, and she's a beautiful woman, and for some reason she's wearing a halter top, right? Even though it's snowing, right? So there's a sense of innocence and beauty and a kind of like lewd thing going on where you're contrasting sexuality and violence, right? Particularly in America. And then like, as that character walks down the hallway, what is the audience doing and feeling? Don't do it. Don't do it. Don't go down there. Don't go down there. Why are you doing that? And then our kind of buffer against that is, oh, that's dumb. That's dumb, right? That's what I always felt. Like, don't do it. Don't do it. She's doing it. That's dumb, right? Because you don't want to be taken there. And so Cormac starts us off. The technique is like that of a horror film. We met the kid. Let's meet the judge. Page 5. The Reverend Green had been playing to a full house daily as long as the rain had been falling, and the rain had been falling for 2 weeks. When the kid ducked into the ratty canvas tent, there was a standing room along the walls, a place or two, and such a heady reek of the wet and bathless that they themselves would sally forth into the downpour now and again for fresh air before the rain drove them in again. He stood with others of his kind along the back wall. The only thing that might have distinguished him in that crowd was that he was not armed. "Neighbors," said the Reverend, "he couldn't stay out of these here hell holes right here in Nacogdoches. I said to him, ye gonna take the Son of God in there with ye? And he said, oh, no, I ain't. And I said, don't you know that he said, I will follow ye always, even unto the end of the road? Well, he said, I ain't asking nobody to go nowheres. And I said, neighbor, you don't need to ask. He's going to be there with you every step of the way, whether you ask it or you don't. I said, neighbor, you can't get shit of him. Now, are you going to drag him, into that hellhole yonder? You ever see such a place for rain? The kid had been watching the Reverend. He turned to the man who spoke. He wore long mustaches after the fashion of Teamsters, and he wore a wide-brim hat with a low round crown. He was slightly wall-eyed, and he was watching the kid earnestly as if he'd know his opinion about the rain. I just got here, said the kid. Well, beats all I ever seen. The kid nodded. An enormous man dressed in an oilcloth slicker had entered the tent and removed his hat. He was bald as a stone, and he had no trace of beard, and he had no brows to his eyes, nor lashes to them. He was close on to 7 feet in height, and he stood smoking a cigar even in this nomadic house of God, and he seemed to have removed his hat only to chase the rain from it, for now he put it on again. The Reverend had not stopped his sermon altogether. There was no sound in the tent. All watched the man. He adjusted his hat, and then he pushed his way forward as far as the crate-board pulpit where the Reverend stood, and there he turned to address the Reverend's congregation. His face was serene and strangely childlike. His hands were small. He held them out. Ladies and gentlemen, I feel it my duty to inform you that the man holding this revival is an impostor. He holds no papers of divinity from any institution recognized or improvised. He is altogether devoid of the least qualification to the office he has usurped, and has only committed to memory a few passages from the good book for the purpose of lending to his fraudulent sermons some faint flavor of the piety he despises. In truth, the gentleman standing here before you posing as a minister of the Lord is not only totally illiterate, but is also wanted by the law in the states of Tennessee, Kentucky, Mississippi, and Arkansas. Oh, God, cried the Reverend, lies, lies! He began reading feverishly from his open Bible. On a variety of charges, the most recent of which involved a girl of 11 years. I said 11, who had come to him in trust and whom he was surprised in the act of violating while actually clothed in the livery of his God. A moan swept through the crowd. A lady sank to her knees. This is him, cried the Reverend, sobbing. This is him, the devil. Here he stands. Let's hang the turd, called an ugly thug from the gallery to the rear. Not 3 weeks before this, he was run out of Fort Smith, Arkansas, for having Congress with a goat. Yes, lady, that is what I said. Goat. Well, damn my eyes if I won't shoot the son of a bitch, said a man rising at the far side of the tent, and drawing a pistol from his boot, he leveled it and fired. The young teamster instantly produced a knife from his clothing and unseamed the tent and stepped outside into the rain. The kid followed. They ducked low and ran across the mud toward the hotel. Already gunfire was general within the tent, and a dozen exits had been hacked through the canvas walls, and People were pouring out, women screaming, folk stumbling, folk trampled underfoot in the mud. The kid and his friend reached the hotel gallery and wiped the water from their eyes and turned to watch. As they did so, the tent began to sway and buckle, and like a huge and wounded Medusa, it slowly settled to the ground, trailing tattered canvas, walls, and ratty guy ropes. The bald-headed man was already at the bar when they entered. On the polished wood before him were 2 hats and a double handful of coins. He raised his glass, but not to them. They stood up to the bar and ordered whiskeys, and the kid laid his money down, but the barman pushed it back with his thumb and nodded. "These here's on the judge," he said. They drank. The teamster set his glass down and looked at the kid, or he seemed to. You couldn't be sure of his gaze. The kid looked down the bar to where the judge stood. The bar was that tall, not every man could even get his elbows up on it, but it came just to the judge's waist, and he stood with his hands placed flatwise on the wood, leaning slightly, as if about to give another address. By now, men were piling through the doorway, bleeding, covered in mud, cursing. They gathered about the judge. A posse was being drawn to pursue the preacher. "Judge, how'd you come to have the goods on that no count?" "Goods," said the judge. "When was you in Fort Smith?" "Fort Smith." "Where did you know him to know all that stuff on him?" "You mean the Reverend Green?" "Yes, sir, I reckon you was in Fort Smith before you come out here." "I was never in Fort Smith in my life. Doubt that he was." They looked from one to the other. "Well, where was it you run up on him?" "I never laid eyes on the man before today. Never even heard of him." He raised his glass and drank. There was a strange silence in the room. The men looked like mud effigies. Finally, someone began to laugh. Then another. Soon they were all laughing together. Someone bought the judge a drink. What is our first impression of his honor, the judge?
Doesn't have much of it.
Doesn't have
Much of it.
honor?
As compared to moral honor, he has his honor, and that's really it.
Has his honor. What else about first impression of the judge?
Our first interaction with him, and he literally is introduced to us as the devil.
Well, that's what the Reverend says, right?
Yeah.
The Reverend definitely believes that that is the case. Did you have a hand? Oh, I'm sorry. What else is our first impression of the judge?
I mean, he's introduced as clearly not bothered about lying to the point of having a man he's never met killed. For whatever reason is in his mind is never given, but he has no qualms about it.
An interesting thing about all of this, when the kid comes in the bar, the judge manages to get away with the Reverend's offering, right? He's got the 2 hats, the double handful of coins. Now, he's not spending the money on anything other than just buying everybody rounds of drinks. But there's a trickster quality and a kind of joyfulness in wrongdoing. Right? This is not depressed Shagur evil. This is ebullient evil. Right? Walks in, destroys a preacher's life, takes the man's offering, buys everybody drinks. Then, right, he tells the men, "Oh, I didn't know him at all. I just made all that up." And people are like, "Good one," right?
Good boy.
That's their response to it. Why are these men, why do they laugh? Why are they taken with him? Why are they seduced by Judge Holden, by his actions here?
It seems like they kind of just crave violence. I mean, even when the kid walks into the tent, he makes sure that Cormac makes sure that we know that he is the only one in there that's not armed. Why would these random people just be armed in a house, a nomadic house of God?
Right?
They're just violent.
They're violent people, frontier people, right? And when they see the judge, they see what?
Camaraderie, I guess.
maybe a sense of camaraderie. What else about him? Like, he's this enormous, bald, hairless man, right? Nearly 7 feet tall at a time when the average height of men was 5'5", 5'6" in America.
It's like the law of the land. So like he represents like all the cruelty of like the area. Because like if the judge was like, you know, like actual like a real judge who like cared about truth and cared about logic and what's the right thing to do, it seems like he represents all the cruelty that's going on at the time.
In a legal way, if you're taken before an actual judge, you know, a judge in North Carolina, where does that judge get his or her authority?
They're elected, mandated.
Okay, so the state appoints, or maybe a judge is elected, right? Either way, he or she is placed in this position of power by the apparatus of government, by a state or by a presidential appointment who appoints judge, right? So there is a sense that authority comes like top down, right? And that there is this code. Someone else said something about where a judge derives his authority. Yes, ma'am.
Said the law.
The law. There's a sense of law. It's like supposed to be. The law is impartial. The law is supposed to be not greedy. The law is supposed to be applied equally, but the judge is acting on his own authority, right? Acting on his own authority, the phrase that comes to mind. He's going to continue to act on his own authority. And determining the judge's principles is going to be a good deal more difficult than determining Shagur's. Shagur is quite straightforward, right? I mean, if there's a similarity to McCarthy's villains in that they are these philosopher bad men. They're effectively violent, highly violent, and also they present as calm and informed, wise about the world. Shagur is not dishonest. He's psychopathic, but there's not a dishonesty to him. The judge immediately comes across to us as a trickster. Right? He's immediately making moves. We can't know enough about him from this opening chapter to say is he chaos, is he order? We'll find that out. But he brings to mind other characters who have been built off of him. The characters he was built off, Iago from Shakespeare's Othello, Satan from Milton's Paradise Lost, Ahab from Melville's Moby Dick, right? Those are the kind of forebears. And the judge has also given birth to a number of characters, a number of villains. The Russell Crowe's character, as he's portrayed in the remake of 3:10 to Yuma, is very, very much based off the judge. The characters in John Hillcoat's The Proposition, particularly the leader of the gang, played by Danny Houston, is based off the judge. It's kind of what Coleridge said about Iago is that Iago in Othello has a, quote, motiveless malignancy. And there is a similar thing about the judge where we don't quite know why he's malignant. We don't really know where his evil comes from, motiveless, but he just dispenses it. However, he is joyful in doing so. We usually expect, even Shagur's depressed, right? Shagur's not happy to be Shagur. He's kind of like a grim harbinger of death. The judge is having a blast. And why not? Quickly, the element of having this character be 7 feet tall, what does that introduce? What does that bring to the judge's makeup? Okay, there's a factor of intimidation because just his size, his physical size.
And then also maybe the idea of I don't want to say not being normal,
absolutely the word. Absolutely, right? He's alien to these people, or alien from these people.
I think it's like in contrast to Shagur, who was described as like looking like a normal man, looking like everybody else. The
Right.
judge automatically stands out. Even if he wasn't evil, you would still notice him in the crowd.
Yeah, it's been more than a few, but 20 years ago, when the World Cup was on, there was all these soccer judges, and there was this one guy, I think he was Australian, don't know his name, bald, right? And like, enormous. I don't know if he was 7 feet tall, but damn near, right? And if you watch the soccer game, you know that the players try to kind of like finagle the judges, right? They try to like the referees. They try to kind of, do this guy, this particular referee had complete command. Like the players weren't, and why not? What's he going to do? Beat him up on the field? No, he's a referee. But just his physical presence, like you were saying, there's an element of intimidation just by his size. Like, and it's a real thing about people moving through the world. Even if you're in an environment, it's not going to be violent. It's not going to turn violent. Maybe you're in a courtroom and someone's lawyer is this like enormous, freakishly big and kind of freakish looking. No, not that it's bad to have this kind of stuff, but like the look of the judge combined with what he does is like, I think alien is such a great word for it. This is precisely what I would choose, that he seems not to be of the place he's in. And also kind of the fittest survivor of the place he's in, right? A natural leader, this is a little different. Benjamin Franklin said that George Washington was the just natural choice for their leader because he was always the tallest man in any room. And that stuff is, I'm 5'8", right? So we kind of like throw shade on the idea that someone tall has authority, but it's a real thing. It's a real thing. If I see a guy's taller than me, some part of me, some like lizard part of my brain, it's like, well, get his input. He knows things. Well, maybe not, right? It's a very interesting, very like physical creature kind of thing. Still got 15 minutes. I'll point out a couple of things. The people that help the kid in the section we read for today, in the pages we read for today, a woman tends to him after he's been shot, saves his life. When he is hungry in the wilderness and might very well starve, it is a multi-ethnic group of cowboys, right? Freedmen, Native Americans, Mexican, Texas Mexican folks, right? They like give him food. They give him, right? They give him a knife and all this kind of stuff. He, when he's talking to Captain White, turns that into a lie about having been robbed, right? These people set on me. And then the captain's like, were they Mexicans? It's like, yeah, if you were, like, and plays off that racial animus, right? So you're going to see over and over again, the people in this book who actually help the kid are either women or people of color. I think it's a very interesting commentary that the people who are on the margins of this particular world at this particular time are the ones that actually assist our protagonist. And the other guys are taking from him, or he's doing crime with them. He's burning down a hotel or whatever it is, right? The Mennonite on page 41 to 43 is an interesting character and is a shout out to one of the books that gives birth to Blood Meridian, Moby Dick. Before Ishmael and Queequeg board the Pequod, a lot of weird words in that sentence. Before they do so, there's this prophet, and that chapter is called Elijah, and he's like, hey, don't get on that boat. Ahab is crazy, Ahab is, blah, 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 blah. And of course they ignore him as the kid and his friends ignore the Mennonite. And it's a direct shout out to this expedition is doomed. You didn't want any part of it. I'm going to can double back for a few things if we have time, but I don't want to miss an opportunity to talk about the Comanche attack on page 55. It's one of the most amazing passages in all of literature. And just, it's like a Hieronymus Bosch painting or something. It's just like out of a vision out of hell. One of the reasons why the Comanche were particularly effective in battle at this particular time and against Anglo paramilitaries like the Texas Rangers, etc. So the Comanche did most everything in battle from horseback, right? So their lances were created to be able to use from horseback, like to have the advantage of momentum, much like a medieval knight, right? Their bows were shorter bows that could be fired entirely from horseback. The Comanche fired them like level, like horizontal with the horizon, right? So as Western archery is like this kind of, you have this kind of shape, right? The Comanche were firing like this and were expert marksmen. Now, in initial engagements between bands like the Texas Rangers in the late 1830s, early 1840s, and the Comanche, the Texas Rangers got their asses handed to them almost every time. And so what they carried was the Kentucky long rifle. That was the most advanced piece of weapons technology available to them in the late 1830s, early 1840s, all right? Here's what that means. You have a weapon that is pretty damn accurate out to 200, 300 yards. And there are excellent marksmen who can put rounds on target at 400 yards with talking open iron sights. However, the Texas Rangers would get an engagement with the Comanche. They would see the Comanche riding over and they would all get off their horses. And they would picket their horses. They would lie on the ground, right? Now, the Comanche are experts at this. They're not going to ride like in a straight line at you. They didn't ride straight anything. They wheeled. They used the offside of their horses for cover. They shot their bows from underneath the horses' necks, right? So the entire time the Comanches are 100 yards out, here they come. And you can hit a target that isn't moving at 100 yards. So the Texas Rangers fire a volley with their long rifles. Then what do they have to do?
Reload.
Now, here's what reloading looks like with a long rifle, with a musket. First, you have to stand up. You have to stand up, right? Then you have to measure out powder. You measure into your palm. You pour the powder down the muzzle. Then you have to get out a little patch, put it on top of the muzzle. Then you have to put a lead ball on top of it. Then you have to pull out, right, ramrod, and you're ramming the ball all the way down. If you don't get it all the way down, you've created a pipe bomb, which is not good, right? Then you have to put the hammer at half cock. Then you have to get a little thing called a percussion cap and cap what's called the nipple underneath the trigger, or I'm sorry, underneath the hammer, right? Oh, I dropped it, I'm sorry. And you have to get it back and you put it on, right? On this whole time, the Comanches are moving. And then right about when, you throw up to get another shot, a Comanche runs a lance through your belly, right? So, and the whole time that you're, loading your muzzle, your musket, the Comanches are firing arrows this quickly. Bam, 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 right? Get off 20 arrows in a minute. You can get off, if you're very good, 1 shot a minute. So the Comanche literally rode over their enemies and festooned them with arrows, and that's the way it was. Now, in 1836, this ne'er-do-well from Connecticut named Samuel Colt created a pistol that could be fired more than once without reloading it. It had a revolving cylinder. This was called a revolver, right? So the problem was that gun had to be disassembled to be reloaded. So the reload was a 5 to 10 minute affair. But the idea of a weapon that could be fired 5 times, it was a 5-shooter, that could be fired 5 times without having to be reloaded was a game changer. However, no one wanted them at first. No one could see the utility of this. So Sam Colt tried to sell them to the U.S. government. The U.S. government finally bought some. Sam Colt went bankrupt. And those weapons ended up in the hands of the Texas Navy, which then ended up in the hands of a ranger named Jack Coffee Hayes. This changed the whole game. In 1844, Coffee Hayes outfitted his men with like 3 pistols apiece. These were the Patterson revolver. So they rode directly at the Comanche. And the Comanche were like, we haven't seen this before. All right? So they charged each other, and then Coffee Hayes said, get close before you fire, like 10 yards. And then when they closed distance, the Rangers cocked their pistols and just bam, 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 bam. And so the Comanches ran into a wall of lead. And this changes the engagement, the pistol. And Texas Rangers found Samuel Colt and said, we want you to make more of these, but we want these specifications. So the pistol, the revolver, takes off, and Sam Colt becomes a legend and a squillionaire, kind of like the Elon Musk of pistols or something, right? So this kind of, you see this in the Comanche attack, page 55. A rattling drove of arrows passed through the company, and men tottered and dropped from their mounts. Horses were rearing and plunging, and the Mongol horde swung up along their flanks and turned and rode full upon them with lances. The company was now come to a halt, and the first shots were fired, and the gray rifle smoke rolled through the dust as the lancers breached their ranks. The kid's horse sank beneath him with a long pneumatic sigh. He had already fired his rifle, and now he sat on the ground and fumbled with his shot pouch. A man sat near him with an arrow hanging out of his neck. He was bent slightly as if in prayer. The kid would have reached for the bloody hoop iron point, but then he saw that the man wore another arrow in his breast to the fletching, and he was dead. Everywhere there were horses down and men scrambling, and he saw a man who sat charging his rifle while blood ran from his ears, and he saw men with their revolvers disassembled trying to fit the spare loaded cylinders they carried, and he saw men kneeling who tilted and clasped their shadows on the ground, and he saw men lanced and caught up by the hair and scalps standing, and he saw the horses of war trample down the fallen, and a little white-faced pony with one clouded eye leaned out of the murk and snapped at him like a dog and was gone. After those series of saws, the kid disappears into a pure lens for McCarthy. He's no longer referred to in the rest of the passage. Among the wounded, some seemed dumb and without understanding, and some were pale through the masks of dust, and some had fouled themselves or tottered brokenly onto the spears of the savages, now driving in a wild freeze of headlong horses with eyes walled and teeth cropped, and naked riders with clusters of arrows clenched in their jaws, and the shields winking in the dusk. And up the far side of the ruined ranks in a piping of bone flutes, and dropping down off the sides of their mounts, with one heel hung in the wither strap, and their short bows flexing beneath the outstretched necks of their ponies until they had circled the company and cut their ranks in two, and then rising up again like funhouse figures, some with nightmare faces painted on their breasts, riding down the unhorsed Saxons and spearing and clubbing them and leaping from their mounts with knives and running about on the ground with a peculiar bandy-legged trot like creatures driven to alien forms of locomotion, and stripping the clothes from the dead and seizing them by the hair and passing their blades about the skulls of the living and the dead alike, and snatching aloft the bloody wigs, and hacking and chopping at the naked bodies, ripping off limbs, heads, gutting the strange white torsos, and holding up great handfuls of viscera, genitals, some of the savages so slathered up with gore they might have rolled in it like dogs, and some who fell upon the dying and sodomized them with loud cries to their fellows. And now the horses of the dead came pounding out of the smoke and dust and circled with flapping leather and wild manes and eyes whited with fear like the eyes of the blind. And some were feathered with arrows and some lanced through and stumbling and vomiting blood as they wheeled across the killing ground and clattered from sight again. Dust stanched the wet and naked heads of the scalped, who, with the fringe of hair below their wounds and tonsured to the bone, now lay like maimed and naked monks in the blood-slaked dust. And everywhere the dying groaned and gibbered, and horses lay screaming. Have a great day. I'll see you next time.